right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. Man, what's going on in the hip-hop world right now? You guys know this isn't really my genre. I think there's other channels that are probably built better or that are more credible when it comes to talking about the Crip underworld. Channels like the Kev Max, the Compton Rick Rocks, the Cartoon 5-3s, the Munchie B's. Even though Munchie B's the blood, these are the channels that stay in the know when it comes to this genre. But there's so much drama going on right now that I had to drop something on it. But besides that, even though I think that there's certain people that are just built better at talking about certain topics or certain genres, that doesn't mean that it's not open game for other channels to talk about these things as well. Something that applies equally across the board. So with that said, let's get into it. Where do I even start? Literally, the hip hop world is on fire right now. And for those viewers that have been saying that YouTube's been kind of dry lately, I'm sure that with everything that has been happening over the course of the last couple of weeks, that there's plenty to talk about on all fronts. So first, for starters, the new reigning star of No Jumper, 4 Extra, gets snatched up and thrown back in the LA County Jail in an area that he claims he started, Crip Alley. And then of course, Adam 22 had to scramble to get his backup back in the studio, Whack 100, to keep his podcast going. Man, I almost feel sorry for Adam 22. It seems like every time he gets somebody that he likes back in his studio, somebody that he has good chemistry with, they end up getting snatched back up either because they're on probation, parole, or they're just out there acting like a fool. So let's keep it moving. Then Lefty Gunplay gets arrested in Texas on the eve of performing at Rolling Loud, California. But unfortunately for him, this was predicted to be one of his biggest, if not the biggest, event of his career. In fact, I just caught a little tidbit this morning. I don't know if it's true or not, that his record label might have even dropped him. That's something that I gotta look into, but either way, it just seems like Lefty Gunplay don't know how to stop acting out and that he likes that negative attention. He's still got that mentality that eventually is gonna end up sabotaging his career. Some of it I think has to do with him not knowing how to deal with the growing pains of stardom, the attention of blowing up. And then on the flip side of it, it's not like he's one of those guys that's just overflowing with charisma. Because I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I don't particularly care for him myself. I don't like his music, and it's got nothing to do with where he's from, him being a Sureño or nothing like that. You guys already know how I get down. I got nothing but respect and love for Southern California. I'm always saying that. But there's just something about the way that he's always showing his teeth and the weird body movements that he's always doing where I can't watch him for more than 5 seconds at a time. But then on the flip side, you can't take nothing away from the guy either, because no matter how he did it, he ranks somewhere close to the top when it comes to Chicano rappers. Moving on, then Sucker Free 104, also known as Dumps from Lennox, he gets rolled up on and taken out as he's striking his hood up on a wall. It's an unfortunate situation, and I don't wish death on no one, whether I like him or not, because there's no coming back from that. And once you're gone, you're gone. And even though he was young and had just barely began to live his life, some people are saying that his own actions perpetrated his own demise, and that this was a direct result of the type of lifestyle that he was living. And we all seen it. He obviously made a lot of enemies in the short amount of years that he lived, based on some of the music that he put out. To be more specific, there was a controversial song that he put out called Call It Like I See It, that was apparently the basis for one of his memorials getting desecrated. I seen a YouTube short where there was a couple of youngsters that were giggling like a bunch of schoolgirls. They ran over to his candles, they kicked his candles, and they ran off. And even though these guys were youngsters, still, they desecrated this guy's memorial, and it was out of pocket. And I clearly understand the controversy surrounding that song. I listened to it, I heard the lyrics. I don't support that either. I'll be doing separate pieces on all these stories, so just be looking for them to drop sometime within the next few days. Like I said, one thing's for sure, these couple of incidents that happened over the course of these last 2 weeks have definitely had the whole hip-hop community buzzing. Just these last couple of days, another well-known rapper named Yella Beezy out of Texas just got caught up in what's being described as a murder for hire plot. They're saying that he allegedly paid someone to take out one of his rivals, MO3. And it's crazy because a lot of these rappers that are getting caught up, that are making good money, they end up throwing it all away over something petty, something that they should have just let go. but they can't do it because their ego or their feelings won't allow it. But anyways, next, you had a new channel come out in the prison genre. I guess you could say it's in the prison genre, called Who's Who's by B Brazy from Denver Lanes and his Celly, who I believe is from Miller Park Blood. This channel comes out, and in a few short weeks, it ends up going lightweight viral. I mean, to keep it real with you guys, when a channel goes viral, we're talking about in the millions or at least in the hundreds of thousands. But it was a channel that got a lot of traction in a short period of time. Every time I turned on YouTube, I seen Who's Who. There was a new video from B Brazy and his Celly. And let me just try to put this in perspective for you guys. This channel is somewhat of a spin-off that came from 4 Extras County Jail Stories, where he talks about all these fades that he apparently got into. So when B Brazy heard 4 Extras' version of a squabble that they had gotten into, B Brazy ended up chiming in and giving his version that was slightly different. Thus, his channel, The Who's Who, was born. And let me just say this, I really don't watch too many other YouTube channels because most of the time they just consist of some of the same type of drama and bickering that I unfortunately experienced with other YouTube channels myself. But with a name like Who's Who that was being ran by active bloods in prison on a level 4 yard, I checked out some of the videos on this channel because for one, it was entertaining. And for two, I just wanted to see how long it was going to take for B Brazy to get caught up in the back and forth YouTube drama. And again, like I said, considering the title of this channel being called Who's Who, exposing the fakes, the frauds, and the charlatans within the Bloods and the Crips, it didn't take long at all. Even though despite the fact that one of B Brazy's catchphrases or opening lines is, "We ain't here to start no trouble, we ain't trying to cause no drama, and we don't want no problems." The drama came, and it came fast. But here's where I was a little disappointed. Unfortunately, it came with one of B Brazy's own people, as it often does with another reputable blood that has a pretty popular channel within the blood and crip genre called Munchie B from Inglewood Families. And shout out to Munchie B. If you haven't checked out his channel, check him out and subscribe to him. The Who's Who's as well. Even though they're offline right now, I would imagine that they're probably gonna get back online when they get another phone. But whenever they get back online, tap into them, give them some support, and check them out. You know, I don't want to get too far off track and spend too much time on this, but honestly, I really wasn't too surprised that it ended up happening with his own people. And why am I not surprised? Because look at YouTube. Nobody's exempt from it, including myself. You know, I don't know what it is about YouTube, but there's some type of infectious hex or condition about YouTube that seems to afflict most of the content creators that are given a platform. You know, and I'll keep it real. When it comes to social media, and I'm not just talking about YouTube, I'm talking about social media in general. It has a way of destroying friendships fast, regardless of how long or how solid you might think they are. Because unlike the old school way when you would deal with your problems by running a heads up fade or fisticuffs, social media gives people the ability to attack and defame other people's character. And it's done to the masses, something that exacerbates the hate and makes it a lot more personal. Like I said, I'm speaking in general terms, but if you pay attention, you'll see that a lot of the new content creators, they'll start out humble, laid back, where they're reserved, and where they purposely try to stay out of the drama that they know exists on YouTube. A lot of them will even allude to it and will tell you straight up that they don't participate. But whether it's a month, a couple of weeks, or even a matter of a couple of days, all of a sudden, all the snake moves start coming into play. All the backbiting, the backstabbing, the spreading of gossip and rumors, that's how it all starts. They start getting into wrecks, they start going in on people, their own people, and then all of a sudden the gloves come off, they start talking shit, and then they learn that participating in drama and controversy is the fastest way to get traction to your channel. And then they also learn that they feel a sense of empowerment sitting in front of a keyboard and a monitor in the safety of their own home, where nobody else can get them. You know, I don't need to tell you guys have seen it yourselves. It's all part of this new social media phenomena that's been evolving over these last 10 years. Most of the time, this is what draws a lot of you to these channels. The drama, the controversy, and all the other negative things that come with it. It has strong entertainment value. And let's face it, people like to see conflict. They like to see people going at each other's necks. So aside from all the entertainment that Who's Who was bringing to the YouTube world, a couple of weeks ago, whispers and tidbits started hitting the airwaves from a select number of other content creators like 600 and Whack 100. reaction videos then started coming out from a lot of active Bloods and Crips saying that it wasn't cool for these guys to be speaking on open cases, and that they were basically doing the feds' dirty work, waking up a sleeping giant and pointing them in Big U's direction. And I'm not gonna lie, some of the thumbnails were hilarious. They were putting police uniforms on WAC 100, 600, basically calling both of them the police. But as entertaining and as funny as it might have been for some people, unfortunately for Big U, that entertainment ended up turning into a harsh reality. So I remember tuning into my YouTube channel on the morning of March 19th and seeing a short that Big U had just posted saying that he was on his way to turn himself in. And I just remember watching it thinking that it had a familiar feel about it that was similar to watching Al Cowlings drive O.J. Simpson down the 405 freeway in his white Ford Bronco. And even though Big U wasn't on a high-speed pursuit trying to evade 30 black and white LAPD police cars, just seeing his temperament, knowing that the game was over, took me back to that time. That was the morning that the feds unsealed a RICO indictment against Big U and 18 other members and associates of the Rolling 60s neighborhood Crips. You know, Big U characterized it as another public lynching, but then those that were closely associated with Big U, they called it how they seen it. And the hate was real. You know, before I dive deeper into this story, let me just touch on something real quick. You know, having been in a similar situation like this myself, where I was the main target in a criminal indictment like this, I know firsthand how ugly things can get. So after reality kicks in and you come to terms with the gravity and seriousness of the ugly situation that they got you in, then you begin feeling a strong sense of hopelessness, almost like you know you're never gonna see the streets again. Off the top, you're gonna find out who your real friends are. You're also gonna find out who are gonna be the ones that are gonna jump on that bandwagon and are gonna start working against you. This is when all the haters, the critics, the naysayers, and the criminal predictors who all seem to know what you're gonna do start coming out the woodwork. Now, all of a sudden, all the people that smiled in your face and shook your hand when they were standing right there in front of you seem to all have something negative to say. And trust me, there's never a shortage of them. Like they say, the bigger you get, the harder people want to see you fall. That's a true statement. It's human nature, whether it's in our DNA or whether it's a character flaw. People like to see those at the top fall because generally they're not there themselves and they want to see someone else in that spot. You know, I heard a clip yesterday where WAC 100 apparently spoke to a female family member of one of Big U's alleged victims, Rayshawn Williams, the aspiring artist he's accused of unaliving. And this call was recorded months ago, probably sometime around November, December of last year. And WAC, no disrespect, but at the time, WAC obviously didn't tell her that he was recording their phone conversation. Another dirty move that a lot of YouTubers will do. In this phone conversation, this female family member, she confided in WAC. She basically told him, WAC, you can't repeat this. You can't tell nobody. But Big U's arrest is imminent and it's coming sometime at the end of March or early April. And come to find out, she wasn't bullshitting because here we are at the end of March and Big U's in custody. And get this, I heard another call where apparently some of Big U's so-called homeboys were on some kind of conference call that again sounded like it was inconspicuously recorded. In this recording, one of them basically tells the others that Big U's not gonna go down for this. That if they think that he's gonna hold his mud and stick to the code, that they're not keeping it real and that they're only lying to themselves. He basically tells the others that when you're in your late 50s like Big U and you got several properties, you got cars, you got a family, you got kids, money in the bank, assets, that it hits a lot different than it does somebody that's in their 20s and who doesn't have shit out there. That basically it's an incentive and a motivator for someone to cooperate and to want to get back out there to their family. This guy then goes on to say that he blocked everyone that got indicted, he unfriended everyone on all his social media platforms, and that he blocked their numbers so that they can't call him. That he doesn't want to talk to anybody until this case is over and he sees where they stand. And I'm just gonna say this, I'm not throwing no shade at anyone and I'm not speaking on anyone in particular. I'm speaking in general terms and general terms only. But everything this guy was saying about being older, having money in the bank, having a family, kids, assets, a house, cars, and a life with a purpose is true. You don't have kids, you don't have property or anything else that gives your life any value. It's a lot easier for someone like that to take a life sentence. However, years later, sometime down the line, a light bulb's gonna go off and you're gonna realize the extent of your mistakes. But by then, it's gonna be too late. Even for those of you that have allowed yourselves to get out there and see some of the world, trust me, they've got places that are amazing out there. Some of the resorts that you can go to, places that you can just get away with your family. Just imagine getting away with your wife, your girl, or even your family and spending a week in a place like one of these. These are the kind of things or places that'll make you realize how aimless it is to spend years of your life locked up in a concrete box. But anyways, who knows what Big U is thinking right now? Maybe even at 59, his love for the hood and the rolling 60s might be enough to make him hunker down and take it on the chin. That he wouldn't be able to accept the shame of dishonoring his legacy. And that in the end, his sense of false pride might be enough to make him stay the course. However it goes, one thing's for sure. You can bet your bottom dollar that he's weighing out all his options right now and that he's thinking about his next best move. Because even at 59, he doesn't have a lot of time to waste. He either gets it right or he doesn't. Only Big U knows what he's gonna do. So we'll see what happens. So when I considered doing a piece on this story, at first I was gonna run you guys through Big U's history, through the rolling 60s history, how they adopted their name through the number streets between Slauson and Florence, and how a small neighborhood Big U used to live in used to be called the AGs, the Arlington Gang, before it morphed into their section of the rolling 60s. But there's so much out there on the history, Big U's history right now, that I just decided to do it different. And again, this is probably getting closer to doing a reaction video. And honestly, I don't even care. Call it what you want. I still won't participate in the drama. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Anyways, another part of this story that I wanted to talk about is a video clip that I seen a few years back when Big U first got out of prison. So in this interview, he said something to the effect of Suge Knight never would have been able to move like that if he would have been out, and that death row never would have existed if he would have been on the streets. You know, with all due respects to Big U, I know he thinks the world of himself and he has this belief about himself that he's bigger than life. And maybe in some sense, maybe in the world of the rolling 60s, maybe he is. But I think this is the same character flaw that a lot of us seen when Big U talked about knocking out 32 Sureños in that Pelican Bay riot. It just isn't true. You know, I personally don't think that Big U would have been that much of a factor to stop Suge Knight from doing anything. The following that he had around him at that time was too strong, and I just don't think he would have been able to stop the creation of Death Row. You know, I personally think that this was said with an air of arrogance, but at the same time, maybe he meant that he wouldn't have allowed Corrupt to be a part of Death Row, and that this would have created some type of interference insofar as everything coming together. You know, there's no question about the fact that Death Row would have had a different look without Corrupt, and that Death Row would have definitely been different. But on the flip side, even without Corrupt, Death Row would have still went on, and that train would have still moved forward. Dre, Tupac, Snoop Dogg, Warren G, Nate Dogg, and the rest of Death Row would have still been there. Like I said, it might have been a little different, but it wouldn't have ceased to exist simply because Big U didn't want to see the Bloods moving around LA like that. You know, who knows? He might have had enough influence to kick off a war between the Bloods and the Crips, but I still don't think it would have been enough to dismantle Death Row. And here's something else to think about. Big U has already proven that he could be bought, that he places money over morals. So who knows? Maybe Suge Knight would have thrown him a couple of good-sized bones to keep him pacified, and all would have been forgiven. You know, I could be wrong, but initially when I seen that interview where Big U was talking about Suge Knight not being able to move like that if he would have been out, I got the sense that some of this was predicated on Big U being envious of Suge Knight's success and that he wanted to be the next one to do it. That's what I was thinking as I was watching that interview. And then over the course of the next few months after Big U got out of prison, he confirmed everything that I thought. Because at some point, he begins to emulate Suge's blueprint for becoming a successful CEO of his own record label. A record label that he called Unique Music. Bottom line, Big U wanted to do what Suge did. He wanted to become the next successful record label owner that created another multi-million-dollar label like Death Row. And everybody knows that Suge ran Death Row like DEFCON 4. He did it within an atmosphere that fed off of violence and intimidation. For those of you that know, he actually had a room in his house that was called the Red Room. This is where he took some of his own people that violated his policies, so that his goons could basically beat the brakes off of him, administering their own form of what they called a red room ass whooping, administering their form of what they referred to as a red room ass whooping. I remember even seeing a documentary where Tupac had mentioned the red room. You know, the other thing that death row had back then that was dangerous for anybody that presented themselves as a threat were a handful of dirty Compton cops that were all part of the Rampart Task Force. And even though they were supposed to be security, they were considered to be part of the team. Nino Durden, Kevin Gaines, David Mack, Rafael Perez, and Reggie Wright Jr. were some of them, just to name a few. And obviously this benefited Suge in a number of different ways. They were feeding him inside information about investigations and other crimes that death row was allegedly involved in. And legally, they could carry guns under the color of authority, something that Suge or some of his other security couldn't do because most of them were either on probation or parole. You know, and these guys, they fronted themselves as being security, but in all actuality, they were part of the criminal element. They were involved in everything that was going on death row. In fact, when Tupac and Biggie got taken out, it was actually some of these cops that got implicated in those cases. You know, even recently, Dwayne Davis, Keefe D, who was charged with orchestrating Tupac's unaliving, implicated Reggie Wright Jr. as being the one responsible for unaliving Tupac. And others were saying that David Mack was responsible for taking out Biggie. You know, who knows who did what when they were doing their thing at that time, as I'm sure there was a lot of people that were associated with death row that had blood on their hands. But I doubt anyone's going to put much weight in anything that comes out of Keefe D's mouth at this point, because his credibility's been shot out. And there's people that believe that he'd probably sell out his own mother to save himself at this point. Anyways, let's get into the actual indictment and how these guys all got caught up, because this case is ugly. So for starters, I don't know if you guys caught this during the acting attorney Joe McNally's announcement of this indictment, but they said that 40 to 60% of this case was built off of information that they gathered from social media platforms. So No Jumper and Vlad were like sounding boards, platforms where people would go on there and either get baited into talking about hot topics, or they would just boast about street biz and would end up saying too much. Take a minute out to really think about that. I mean, it's already known amongst most of us on social media that law enforcement is watching and that they're gathering intel. But this definitely confirms it and shows you how much they're paying attention. And let me just say this about the feds that's already widely known and is a proven fact. When it comes to the feds, they'll sit back for years and investigate you before they decide to move in and get you. They'll give you as much rope as you need. I think they said that this case was in play for close to 4 years, but they've been known to let people commit all kinds of crimes that are sometimes considered to be so egregious that there's been criminal defense attorneys who have accused them of actually being complicit and turning a blind eye on crimes that could have potentially hurt their own cases. So instead of moving on these cases or going after people that would have been counterproductive on their own cases, it's been implied that they just sat back and let certain things happen. So however long it takes before the feds pull the plug and decide to come after you, whenever they do decide to come and snatch you up, they only come get you when they know without a shadow of a doubt that they have you. They're not going to come half-cocked, and they're not going to hit you with the case that you have any chance of beating. The state will. They'll come after you when they just think they got a case. I believe their conviction rate is somewhere between 97 and 98%. So they don't lose too often. Anyways, the feds, they characterize Big U Enterprises as a business that was being ran and stoked by a level of fear and intimidation. They basically painted Big U out to be a bully, someone who operated under the biggest bully on the block mentality. But I'm going to tell you where Big U really messed up, by allegedly committing crimes that potentially involve the IRS. You don't mess around with the IRS. They will stretch you out and park you in federal prison for decades when it comes to defrauding the government or using nonprofit organizations to line your own pockets. When it comes to that kind of stuff, you don't want to mess around. I'd rather be homeless, living in a cardboard box in a park somewhere, than to mess with the IRS. You know, again, Big U is presumed innocent until these people prove their cases against him. but they're alleging that he submitted a fraudulent application for a COVID-19 pandemic relief loan, a loan that allowed him to defraud the government for over $200,000. That's bad business. But if that wasn't enough, what they said he did next was even worse. In simple terms, they're alleging that he used Big U Enterprises as a front that also included his charity, Developing Options, to embezzle $2.3 million straight into his personal account. Money that was supposed to be infused into programs to give at-risk youth alternative choices to gang violence, drugs, and other form of criminal activity. You know, people in his own community really might end up feeling some type of way about something like this. You know, people in his own community might really end up feeling some type of way about something like this, because a crime like this is a crime of moral turpitude. What I mean by that is this. According to the U.S. Attorney, Big U allegedly used his own street cred and his reputation as a front to front himself off as this former high-level gang leader who was on some type of personal crusade to help the youngsters in his community. You know, almost in the sense as if he was some type of anti-gang activist. And most of this was funded by the city of Los Angeles' mayor's office through a foundation called the GRID Foundation, an acronym that stands for Gang Reduction Youth Development, a program that's also become controversial amongst a lot of active gang members. Some feel that their involvement in this GRID program is actually doing a service to the youth. Some feel that their involvement in this GRID program is doing a service to the youth by helping them get away from this lifestyle. While others feel that active gang members shouldn't be involved or closely associated with a program that works hand in hand with law enforcement. You know, I don't want to get too far off track, but let me clarify one thing. Just because you have some active gang members that are working close with some of the youth in this program doesn't necessarily mean that they're telling or that they're working with law enforcement. I personally think that it could be a good thing, but that's just my opinion. And unfortunately, my opinion don't count, especially because a lot of these at-risk youth seem to place a lot of emphasis on real street credibility by real active street gang members that are trying to lead them in the right direction. They'd rather hear it from them opposed to dropouts or former gang members. I'm just keeping it real. But this is the bottom line. When it comes to that belief system amongst active gang members who aren't accepting of this on any level, it's a program that has created a lot of controversy in Southern California. In fact, before people knew what Big U's true purpose and intentions were when he first started working with the GRID program, he also drew a lot of negative criticism just based on the fact that he was associated with it himself. But this was criticism he was obviously willing to accept because he was making buku dollars doing it, laughing all the way to the bank. But aside from GRID being funded primarily by the mayor's office, you had other prominent donors that included music artists, actors, and NBA players. NBA players that included Draymond Green and former NBA player Shaquille O'Neal. So Big U's got a lot of people feeling like he bamboozled them out of a lot of money that was supposed to go to the kids. You know, I would have thought that Big U would have been a lot smarter than this and that he would have did a better job at least at covering his tracks. Because when it comes to this kind of stuff, they're always performing thorough oversight, and that's what gets you busted. And you've got to expect it, especially when they're allotting this kind of money to former criminals. They're looking for it. People don't like to see former criminals handling this kind of money, and this is what makes them push for more oversight. You know, I get it. The criminal mind doesn't discriminate when it comes to generating money. And I personally don't think that it was Big U's specific purpose to take money away from the kids. But essentially, that's exactly what he was doing. And when it comes to this kind of stuff, people are unforgiving. They're gonna look at it in the most worst way possible. So other people who were charged with embezzlement related to developing options were Mark Martin, also known as Bear Claw, and Sylvester Robinson, also known as Vay. Bear Claw was the chief financial officer for developing options, someone who was also well known in the gang intervention world for working with a lot of at-risk youth. So they're also accusing Big U of directing Loose Cannon to commit a robbery on an unlicensed LA marijuana dispensary that apparently stopped making his extortion payments. Again, Big U wanted to be that guy so bad that he started to become reckless. And like a lot of the other stories that I talk about on my channel, some of the other stories that I talk about, the feds put wiretaps on a lot of these guys' phones. They're notorious for that. How many times have I said it? Stop talking on the phone. So a lot of these guys that were involved in this case had their phones tapped, including Big U. The feds basically sat back and listened to phone calls and watched YouTube podcasts. That's how they figured out 60% of this case. So those allegations are probably somewhere at the top of Big U's biggest problems. So another part of this case that could also get real messy is the unaliving of Rayshawn Williams that he's also been implicated in. So the U.S. attorney's alleging that Big U was so upset about a diss song that Rayshawn put out there about Big U that he drove him out to Las Vegas as a ruse, and then at some point he pulled over, shot him in the face, and then dumped him in a ditch on the side of a Las Vegas freeway. As of right now, that part of the case seems to be circumstantial, meaning it looks bad, but that it's all premised on speculative evidence that could go either way. And that may be true, but that's a far cry from proving a homicide, as there's a lot of different possibilities about how that could have got there. And whether it's just the fact that this whole situation is now beginning to turn into a witch hunt, or that people are just starting to throw anything and everything out there, there's another rumor that's being floated that's beginning to gain traction, saying that Big U might be responsible for taking out Nipsey Hussle. You know, I'm not going to get into all the details, but for those of you that are familiar with their history, things ended up getting physical, and they ended up going at it behind some cat that was with the mother of Nipsey's daughter. Big U heard about it and pressed Nipsey to the point where they ended up getting into it. This incident led to Nipsey's brother, Black Sam, pulling out a pistol and firing one time into the air to get Big U off of Nipsey. So because Black Sam got a shot off, this led to the cops showing up a few minutes later and shooting at Black Sam because he still had the gun in his hand. Fortunately for Black Sam, the cop was a terrible shot, so nobody got hit, but all three of them ended up going to jail that night. So they ended up bailing out. But later that night, this led to a big meeting being called by some of the more prominent figures within the Rolling 60s set. And this was all in an effort to reconcile their differences. So according to people that were involved, Big U put tips on Nipsey, and this was something that Nipsey was upset about. So long story short, supposedly they put their differences aside. And even though they squashed it, Big U and Nipsey's friendship was never the same from that point on. They were able to get past it and they kept it civil, but things were different. Big U and Black Sam, on the other hand, continue to have bad blood to this day. And being that Black Sam isn't from the Rolling 60s, Big U always looked at him as an outsider, and he didn't like the fact that Black Sam was trying to involve himself in the 60s politics, brother or no brother. So after the first incident, things apparently escalated again a short time later after Big U's son came home and wanted to get into music. So according to the story that I remember, apparently Nipsey had Big U's equipment somewhere where he basically had exclusive control over it. And I guess because Big U's son wanted to get into music, Big U wanted to move that equipment somewhere where it would be accessible to everybody. And when Big U went over there to get the equipment, Nipsey didn't like it. So from there, Nipsey, he starts spending more time at his store, the Marathon, trying to get it off the ground. People that were closely associated to both Big U and Nipsey said that Big U didn't like the fact that Nipsey had challenged him. And this became the basis for people floating some strong theories about Big U being responsible for Nipsey's demise. So as far as Brick Baby and Loose Cannon, both of them better get some good lawyers, because it sounds like they're in a lot of trouble. And even though you have a lot of people throwing out big numbers, talking about how much trouble both of these guys are in, a lot of it is just gonna depend on how much the U.S. attorney wants to go after them and what kind of deals they're gonna throw at them. You know, like I said earlier, they're charging Loose Cannon with a robbery that Big U allegedly ordered. And apparently Loose Cannon even admitted to committing this robbery later on in an episode of No Jumper. I understand that Loose Cannon wants that clout, but that's just being stupid. Supposedly, that episode was taken down after Big U filed a cease and desist order. But by then it was too late. The feds had already seen it. So we'll see how it all plays out. The feds, they know who the big players are, and they know who the bottom feeders are. The other thing that I heard is that Brick Baby might also be caught up in another indictment involving Lil Durk and Quanjo Rondo. I gotta look into it a little bit more, but if it's true, I'll probably run a separate piece on that as well. You know, in closing, I'm just gonna say this. You know, obviously, nobody knows how this case is gonna play out. There's people already speculating and trying to make predictions on who's gonna stay solid and who's gonna fall out. But just keep this in mind. A lot of the times, it isn't loyalty that's going to become the determining factor. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. In cases like this, where the feds play hardball and they're trying to stretch people out, you can bet that everybody that's involved are weighing out their options and are trying to think about what they're gonna do. You know, it could come down to who's offered a deal first. How much time are they looking at? And other factors like age and where some of these guys are at in their lives. Things that I talked about early on in this story. But all the people that keep talking about how they would stay down if it was them in a situation like this, and how loyal and how down they are, those are the ones that would end up going first. Trust me, I seen it happen. You know, it's easy to say what you would do if it was you in that situation when you're still on the outside looking in. But when it's you in that situation and your life is hanging in the balance, it's comical how fast people's perspectives on life changes and how fast self-preservation kicks in. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you guys like this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. As always, I just want to thank those of you who continue to show your unwavering support and who continue to tap into the channel. With that said, you guys enjoy your week and keep pushing that positivity. Until the next one, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.